How do human beings fall asleep, where the air itself feels unfinished, where every breath is work, and where cold slips through stone as if walls were barely there? Tonight, we enter a Sherpa village where rest should feel impossible, and yet generations learned how to do it. This is not a story about conquest or summit glory. It is a quieter story than that, a story of ordinary families in the high Himalayas. Long before Everest became famous, learning how to rest in thin air, bitter cold, yak-dung smoke, and mountain darkness so vast it seems to swallow the idea of comfort itself. Stand there for a moment at the edge of the village. The altitude reaches you before the cold fully does. Your chest feels subtly unsettled, as if the body is searching for something the air is no longer willing to give in full. You breathe in, but the breath never feels complete. The heart answers by working harder, a little faster, as if it has already learned the bargain the mountains demand. Around you, the peaks rise in black silence under a sky so crowded with stars that darkness itself seems thinner here, stretched wide and high above the earth. Below them, the village holds on. The houses stand close together, low and stone-built, as though they understand that exposure is a danger, and nearness a kind of wisdom. Their roofs are weighted with rock against winter wind. Their walls are thick, rough, practical, shaped by hands that knew shelter had to be earned and then maintained. A little smoke rises from some of them, almost invisible against the freezing blue of evening, carrying the smell of dried yak dung burning in hearths that are never quite strong enough, but still strong enough to matter. That smell is the smell of one more night made possible. The wind does not stop here. It only changes character, sometimes a steady pressure against the valley, sometimes a violent force that makes speech useless. Even now, before full dark, it moves through the village in long unseen streams, pressing at corners, slipping over roofs, testing every gap in stone and wood. Somewhere, a dog barks once. Somewhere a yak shifts in its enclosure. Somewhere a door closes quickly, holding warmth in by almost no margin at all. And that is the central promise of this world. Sleep here was never simple comfort. It was adaptation repeated so many times that it became ordinary. Bodily adaptation, as lungs and blood learn to live inside thin oxygen. Communal adaptation, as families slept close and shared warmth because privacy had no value against freezing air. Architectural adaptation, as low doors, soot-darkened ceilings, raised sleeping platforms, and thick stone walls were shaped around survival. Spiritual adaptation, too, as prayer, ritual, memory, and protective attention softened the edge of night when the body alone could not. All of it was ordinary to them. That is the part that matters most. What feels nearly impossible to us was, for them, simply evening. Simply another meal, another fire, another layering of blankets, another attempt to sleep in a place where sleep could never be taken for granted. They did not think of themselves as heroic for enduring it. Endurance was not an achievement here. It was the form life took. The village grows dimmer while you stand there. The last light drains off the slopes quickly. At this altitude, evening does not linger, it falls. The stars sharpen. The smoke lowers. The cold becomes more direct, more intimate, more certain of itself. And yet, below that huge mountain darkness, there is still this smaller human pattern holding its place. A cluster of homes, a few embers, a few families gathering inward while the open world grows harder around them. That gathering inward is where the story truly begins. Not at the summit, not on a ridge, not in fame, inside the room. Inside the low stone shelter where warmth is weak but meaningful, where smoke hangs in layers, where tea is salty and necessary, where bodies learn to sleep close enough to survive, and where the first real bargain between human rest and mountain cold is made every single night. So let the wide village soften now, let the peaks remain vast, but farther away, let the stars stay above you, cold and innumerable. And move closer, toward one of those houses where the smoke is rising, and the door is low, and the walls are holding just enough against the wind. Because once we step inside, once the open silence gives way to a single room of stone, breath, fire, and family, the impossible question begins to feel less like a mystery, and more like a lived answer. And once we step inside, The impossible question begins to soften. You bend beneath the low doorway and enter the stone house in one small practiced motion. The change is immediate, not into warmth, not fully, but into shelter. The wind is still out there, pressing at the walls, moving across the roof, testing every seam. Yet inside, it loses some of its power. The room does not defeat the mountain night. It only slows it, and that is enough to matter. The walls are thick and close around you, stone stacked on stone, mud pressed into gaps. The whole house built with the patience of people who know that even a little weakness becomes dangerous at this altitude. Outside, cold moves freely over the slopes. Inside, it arrives more slowly. It lingers at the edges instead of taking everything at once. The body feels that difference immediately. The air is darker here, and denser. Smoke hangs in it already, mixed with breath, wool, yak hair, and the faint, dry smell of fuel. Nothing in the room feels fresh in the modern sense. It feels used, held, lived in. This is one of the strongest parts of the original material too. The house is not clean and airy, but layered with soot, smoke, work, and family life. And that very density is part of what makes it survivable. Beneath your feet, the floor is packed earth, worn smooth by many winters. Over parts of it lie coarse mats woven from yak hair. They do not make the room soft, they only make it less severe. But in a place like this, less severe is already a kind of comfort. The hearth sits at the center, not large, not generous, only essential. Stones blackened by long use hold the fire in its shallow place, and above it the ceiling has gone dark with years of smoke. That soot is not only a mark of hardship, it is part of the house now. It seals the small cracks, it holds what little warmth the fire can give. The original script understands this beautifully. The smoke irritates, but the smoke also means fuel, and the soot-black room is part of the house's quiet intelligence. The room serves every purpose: cooking, eating, mending, prayer, talking, rest, sleep. One side holds storage bags and bowls, and the small objects that must not be lost. Another side already feels quieter, as if night belongs there before the family even lies down. Nothing is decorative. Everything has been placed by use and returned by habit. A butter lamp glows near the household shrine. Its light is smaller than the fire, but steadier. It does not brighten the room so much as keep darkness from becoming complete. In the thin air and bitter cold, even that small steadiness changes the feeling of the house. The smoke drifts in slow layers overhead. People here have learned the invisible shape of the room. Higher up, the smoke thickens. Lower down, the air is easier. So bodies stay low when they can. Sit low, eat low, sleep low. The knowledge is not explained each time. It lives in posture, in habit, in the way a family moves through one shared room without needing to discuss why. And after a few moments, the house begins to feel less like a structure and more like a body. Stone ribs, smoke lungs, a dark ceiling that keeps what the fire releases, a low burning heart at the center. The room is not alive, and yet it is participating in life. It receives the wind, it holds the breath of the family. It gives them a place where the mountain is still present, but no longer total. That is why it becomes intimate so quickly, not because it is warm in the modern sense. It is not. The stones still hold cold at the edges, the smoke still stings, the fire still gives too little, but the house is doing what it was made to do. It is holding back the world just enough for family life to continue. That is the soft reveal inside the stone house. It is not comfort. It is protection. Thick walls, low doorway, packed earth floor, yak hair mats, blackened ceiling, central hearth, one room arranged around survival. All of it shaped by the same purpose: to keep out enough wind, hold enough heat, and gather enough human life that sleep can still happen here, even if only lightly, even if only in fragments. So let the room settle around you now, the low door behind you, the mats underfoot, the lamp glow near the shrine, the smoke drifting above, the thick stone holding against the night. Stay there until the house stops feeling harsh and starts feeling knowable. Because once the room feels real enough to trust, the next layer begins to matter. Shelter alone is never enough here. The night becomes survivable only when food, fuel, animals, and the family's evening preparations begin to build the first true warmth the house can offer. The evening meal gathers itself close to the hearth, because in a Sherpa house almost everything important begins there once the light is gone. The room is already narrowed toward the fire. Outside, the mountain cold is falling fast through the village, but inside the stone house the family comes lower. Nearer, quieter. Bowls are set out, the kettle is ready, the fuel burns with its own dry, stubborn glow, and the air carries the bitter familiar smell of yak-dung smoke. No one would mistake that smell for comfort, and yet no one here would mistake it for anything except survival. A wooden bowl is placed into your hands. It is warm at the rim, and inside it the butter tea moves thickly in the dim light. The first taste is salty, heavy, almost surprising if you were born elsewhere. But the body understands it quickly. Heat goes down into the chest. Butter coats the throat against the dry, thin air. Moisture returns to a body that loses water with every breath at this altitude. This is why the tea matters. It is warmth you can drink, fat you can turn into heat, and fluid carried inward against the mountain's slow theft. Beside it comes tsampa, roasted barley flour mixed and pressed by hand into a dense, simple food that asks to be eaten slowly. Here, even digestion requires effort. Too much too fast can leave a person lightheaded in the thin air, so the meal moves in a patient rhythm. Shape, bite, chew, swallow, a little tea, then the same again. On a better night there might be a little soup or dried meat. On an ordinary one, barley and tea are enough to begin the night's work of warming the body from within. The fire burns low while the family eats. Yak-dung does not leap like wood. It glows, smolders, persists. Trees are scarce here, so fuel is gathered from the animals. Dried, stacked, saved, and fed to the hearth in measured amounts. It gives more smoke than generosity, more endurance than comfort. But endurance is what the room requires. That is the first lesson hidden in the meal. Warmth is never one thing. It comes in pieces. The bowl warming the hands, the tea warming the chest, the coals holding their red center. The stones set near the fire, the heavy wool waiting for later, the animals breathing on the far side of the wall. Nothing is sufficient alone. Together, these small sources begin to make a night survivable. So while the family eats, stones are placed near the coals. Not in the deepest heat, where they might crack, but close enough to gather warmth slowly. Later, they will be wrapped in cloth and carried to the sleeping platform. Later, they will become little centers of heat near the feet and legs, precious for an hour or two, then gone. Even that hour matters. The original script understands this beautifully. The heated stones do not solve the night. They soften its first hardest edge. Even the wall beside the hearth is working on its far side. The yak enclosure presses close to the house. The animals shift in straw. Their breath rises in slow clouds. Their bodies make heat in the dark, and that heat moves into the stone itself. The arrangement is practical in every sense, but it is also intimate. Human sleep and animal life are not separate systems here. They are one shared economy of warmth. If you listen, you can hear that economy. A dull movement in the enclosure, a heavy exhale, the faint sound of hoof against stone, the low fire answering from the center of the room. It is not much, yet it changes the feeling of the night. The house begins to feel less exposed, less solitary. A little more tea is poured. The wooden bowl returns its warmth to the palms. The salty fat goes down more slowly now. Blood warms a little. The throat softens. Hunger eases without disappearing. Speech stays low, if it comes at all. Someone says a word about stores. Someone mentions weather. Someone glances toward the animals. Even voices are measured here, because the room is already moving toward its night shape. And that is the soft reveal inside this meal. The first secret of Sherpa sleep is simple. Warmth is never assumed. It is built, guarded, shared, and passed hand to hand. Fire alone is not enough. Tea alone is not enough. Stones alone are not enough. Animal heat alone is not enough. But when all these little sources are gathered and moved carefully into place, the impossible night becomes something the body can begin to understand. Not easy, but understandable. The bowl in the hands, the barley on the tongue, the smoke in the rafters, the low red fuel, the yaks beyond the wall, the stones taking in heat for later. Every piece belongs. So stay close to the hearth a little longer. Let the tea move downward slowly. Let the room gather around its center. Let the body learn that safety here is never one large thing, only many small things held together with care. And once that first layer of warmth has been built, once the meal is finished and the fuel measured and the stones prepared, the next layer begins to matter. Because now the room must turn itself into sleep. Now we move to the platform. The blankets, the clothing layers, the children in the middle, the adults at the edge, and the way one family turns a single raised bed into a living cocoon against the mountain night. And once the first layer of warmth has been built, the room begins to turn itself towards sleep. The raised platform waits against the wall. It sits just high enough above the earth to matter. Not high in any grand sense, only lifted enough to escape some of the deep cold that gathers near the floor. Wooden planks rest on stone supports. Over them lie layered yak hair mats, coarse, dark, and durable, spread one over another until the surface becomes less severe than the ground below. They are not soft. Softness is not their purpose. Their purpose is distance, a little space between sleeping bodies and the cold earth underneath. The original script is very strong on this point. The platform is not luxury, but one of the house's most practical answers to cold. The family prepares it without discussion. No one needs to decide what comes first. The mats are straightened, the blankets are shaken out and laid down in their usual order. The better ones are saved for where they matter most. The warm stones are brought from the edge of the fire, wrapped in cloth, and placed where feet will later find them in the dark. They will not keep their heat for long, but long is not what they are asked to do. They are there to soften the first harsh hour of night. No one undresses instead. The body prepares for sleep by adding what it can. Another wool layer, a felt vest, a robe pulled tighter, wool socks already on, felt boots left on through the night. Hands covered, head wrapped, a scarf if the cold is especially sharp. This is one of the clearest and most valuable details in the source text too. Sleep here does not mean shedding the day. It means carrying warmth into the night and sealing it close to the body. Then the arrangement begins. The youngest children go into the middle, older children close beside them. The parents take the outer places, where the cold will touch first, and where a waking adult can rise most easily if the fire needs tending or the room changes in the night. Nothing about this is sentimental. It is practical, exact, and repeated enough to feel natural. That is the true logic of the bed. Children in the middle, adults on the edge, better blankets where vulnerability is greatest. No wasted gap if a body can fill it. The original script makes this beautifully plain. Privacy has no real value here compared to heat, and nearness is not optional but essential. Shoulder against shoulder, knee near knee, a child's smaller body pressed where shared warmth is deepest. An adult turned slightly outward, toward the edge of the blanket and the colder air of the room. When you lie down in such a place, the first sensation is not comfort but contact. The platform beneath you, the roughness of woven mat through the lower layers, the wrapped stone near the feet, another body already warming the air that the blanket will soon hold. Then the heavier blanket comes down. It is thick, rough, and precious. It settles over the family in one common weight. The edge is tucked lower over a child. Another corner is pulled close at the shoulder. A knee bends inward. A hand disappears into cloth. The room has not become warm, but the bed has begun to become its own small climate. This is where relief starts, not all at once. First, the bedding still holds some cold in the untouched places. The air under the blanket is only slightly better than the air above it. The stones give off their stored heat slowly, then breath gathers under the covering. Heat rises from one body and meets the next. The middle warms first, the outer places later. A child's feet find the cloth-wrapped stones. An adult pulls the blanket a little closer and grows still. And slowly, the bed stops feeling arranged and starts feeling inhabited. That is the reveal hidden in Sherpa sleep. It worked because it was communal. The family did not simply lie under insulation. The family became part of the insulation. Warmth moved from body to blanket, from blanket to trapped air, from trapped air back to skin. The house alone could not provide enough heat. The fire alone could not last brightly enough. The bodies completed the system. Because this has happened so many times before, the arrangement does not feel like compromise. It feels like knowledge. Everyone already knows how to lie, how to curl, how to leave no empty air if a shoulder or folded knee can fill it. The body trusts the pattern because the pattern has carried it through many nights already. So stay there for a while. Feel the blanket weight pressing down in a way that is almost calming. Feel the wrapped heat near the feet. Feel the shoulder at one side and the steady nearness at the other. Feel the relief of no longer needing to hold yourself alone against the room. The cold still exists beyond the coverings. The air above the blanket is still sharp. The stones will cool. The fire will lower. But for this little while, the platform has become what it was meant to become, a living cocoon made of mats. Wool, breath, memory, and family. A child breathes more slowly. An adult makes one last small adjustment at the blanket edge. Someone's head settles lower into cloth. The family is no longer preparing for sleep now. It is inside sleep's first shape. And as the bodies grow still, and the trapped warmth begins its slow work, another world rises gently around them. Not touch now, but sound. The wind outside the stone walls. The yaks shifting beyond the shared wall. The fire breathing low. The human breath under the blanket. And the whole night atmosphere of the village gathering close around the bed. And as the bodies grow still, and the trapped warmth begins its slow work, another world rises gently around the bed. Not touch now sound. The house is never truly silent. Outside, the mountains feel so wide and empty that silence should belong to them. But a Himalayan night is not empty. It is patterned. It is made of a few returning sounds that come again and again, until the body stops listening for danger and begins listening for recognition. First comes the wind. It moves around the stone walls in long unseen passes. It never quite stops here. It only changes force. The original script makes this one of the central truths of the village night. The wind is constant, and after enough winters it becomes less an intruder than a presence the body learns to live inside. Then the embers answer, not with flame now, only with their quieter language. A soft shift under ash, a dry settling sound, a little red breath from the hearth at the center of the room. The sound is small, but it matters. It tells the ear that the fire has not gone out, that warmth still exists in its lowest form. Beyond the wall, the yaks are part of the night too. A heavy exhale, a slow movement in straw, the dull sound of weight changing in the enclosure. Their bodies are unseen, but not absent. Even in darkness they continue to shape the room. Their warmth passes into stone. Their breath passes into the imagination. Their sound makes the house feel less alone. The source text is especially rich here. Animals settling near the house are not background detail, but part of the night's shared system of safety. Inside the blankets, the family adds its own softer sounds. A child sighs. Someone coughs once in the smoke-heavy air. Wool brushes against wool. The platform gives a faint complaint beneath a changing shoulder. Then stillness returns. Not empty stillness, held stillness. This is how evening becomes night. At first, there are low voices near the hearth. A last remark, a bowl set down. Cloth adjusted, stones carried to the bed. Then fewer words. Then no words at all. The house sheds one kind of sound, and enters another. By full dark, the pattern is smaller and deeper. Wind at the wall, ember at the hearth, yak breath beyond the stone, human breath under the blankets. And now and then, from farther away, another sound arrives through the thin cold air. A dog barking somewhere else in the village, a cough from another house. Once in a while, something wilder still, a thin far cry from the dark slopes, perhaps a snow leopard, perhaps only the mountain reminding the village how much night still surrounds it. In the original, this strange carrying of sound through cold air is one of the most memorable parts of the atmosphere. But even those distant sounds do not break the room for long. They join it. That is the comfort. The night does not become safe because it is silent. It becomes safe because it is familiar. The same few sounds return in the same rough order until the body understands that the house is still standing. The village is still there, the animals are still breathing, the family is still close, and the fire, though low, is still alive. Wind, ember, breath, shift, hush, wind, ember, breath, shift, hush. After a while, the loop becomes structure. The ear no longer asks, "What was that?" It only recognizes the room. A Sherpa child would grow up inside these same sounds until they felt as ordinary as heartbeat. The body learns them early and trusts them because they keep returning. So stay in the loop a little longer. The wind at the stone, the ember under ash, the yak breathing in the dark, the small cough beneath the blankets, the platform answering one last movement, the distant bark carried strangely through the cold. Everything remains in its place, everything repeats, and because it repeats, the mind no longer has to stay bright and watchful. It can loosen, it can dim, it can let the ear go on listening while the rest of the body begins to drift downward. Wind, ember, breath, shift, hush. That is how sleep begins here, not in silence, in recognition, and now that the room sounds safe, now that the ear has learned the shape of the night and no longer resists it, the next part can begin. The first descent into sleep, the shallow waking in thin air, the father rising to tend the embers, the coldest hour before dawn, and the body somehow finding its way back again. The family disappears beneath the blankets one by one, until the platform is no longer a place of separate bodies, but one long shared shape against the wall. The heaviest covering comes down last. Its weight is immediate, familiar, almost stern. It presses the warmth inward and the cold outward, at least for a while. Beneath it, the children have already been drawn toward the middle. The adults have taken the outer places without comment, as they always do. A wrapped stone rests near the feet, another farther down where the cold tends to gather first. The room has not become warm, not truly, but the bed has become warmer than the room, and that difference is enough for sleep to begin considering them. Someone says the evening prayer, not loudly, not as a performance, only a low murmured offering to the household gods, the mountain spirits, the old protective presences that must be greeted before the family surrenders itself to the dark. Another voice follows, softer still. Then the prayer is done. It does not remove danger, it does not alter altitude, but it gives the night a boundary. It says, the day is finished, the house is sealed as well as it can be, the family is together, and whatever cannot be controlled must now be met with patience. After that, the fire is banked down, not extinguished, never that, if it can be helped, only reduced to its lower life, embers under ash. A red center covered and protected, so that morning will not have to begin from nothing. The last little sounds from the hearth are small and dry. A coal shifting, a soft fall of ash, then the room enters its deepest darkness. The stones at the feet still hold their heat. The children feel it first. The adults notice it with more restraint. Everyone knows it is temporary. That is part of its value. Warmth that will not last must be used carefully, received without waste, remembered while it is still present. Beneath the blanket, bodies begin the slow work of making a second heat of their own. Breath warms trapped air, cloth warms against skin, the platform loses some of its first cold. Shoulders settle, knees curl inward, one child's toes find the wrapped stone and stay there. Then the first descent begins, not cleanly, not all at once. Sleep here is never a single falling motion, not at this altitude, not in this air. It comes in layers, like warmth itself. First the body grows heavier. Then the eyes begin to release the room. Then thought loosens its grip, but somewhere inside, some smaller mechanism remains awake enough to keep listening. The wind still exists, the fire still matters, the body never entirely forgets where it is. Settle, breathe, drift, for a little while, it works. Then the body rises again, not into full waking, only into that half state so common in high places, where you are not fully asleep and not fully alert, only suddenly aware that the breath has changed. There is a moment, sometimes only a second, when the lungs seem uncertain. The body asks for air and does not quite trust what arrives. You take a deeper breath, then another. The chest works harder. The heart answers with a quicker pulse. Nothing dramatic happens. No one sits bolt upright in panic, but the interruption is real. The night has reminded you where you are. This is how altitude enters sleep. Not as a nightmare, as incompleteness, the breath pauses where it would flow more smoothly lower down. The body slips into one rhythm, then must begin again. A sleeper drifts, then rises briefly inside themselves, takes 2 or 3 deeper breaths, and drops back once more. Around you, beneath the blanket, the family is moving through the same pattern in softer versions. A little sudden inhalation from one side, a slower breath from the other, the faint rustle of someone shifting closer to the warm center. The mountain does not allow perfect sleep here, but it does allow return, and return is enough. You do not move much. Movement wastes heat. It exposes cold places in the bedding that the body has not yet softened. When you shift too far, the blanket opens, a shoulder loses its warm edge, a knee touches cooler air, a pocket of unclaimed cold reaches in like water. So you learn to move only as needed, a slight turn, one hand tucked deeper into cloth, a foot pressed more firmly against the stone while the stone still has something left to give. Outside, the wind continues around the walls. Inside, the room answers in smaller tones. Wind, ember, breath, shift. Hush, wind, ember, breath, shift, shift. Hush. That is the first real loop of the Sherpa night, and because it repeats, the mind learns not to resist it. You drift again, and now dreams begin to enter, not long dreams at first, not narratives, only fragments, a path in snow, a yak turning its head, a hand reaching into a grain sack, the edge of a prayer flag moving in wind. The images brighten strangely, as dreams often do in thin air, and then dissolve just as quickly. Sleep here is full of partial crossings. The body never falls so far that the world disappears entirely. The world remains at the edges, waiting to be heard again. Another waking comes. This time it is the cold at the face. The blanket covers the body well enough, but the nose and mouth live in another climate. The air outside the shared cocoon is far colder than the air beneath it, and the difference grows sharper as the night deepens. You breathe through cloth if cloth is there. The wool smells faintly of smoke and old use. The breath warms it for a moment, then the warmth vanishes, and must be made again. Beside you, a sibling's breathing has slowed, somewhere near the outer edge. An adult gives one low cough, and then becomes still. The wrapped stones are cooling now. They no longer radiate warmth so much as remember it. Toes curl inside, felt boots. The body seeks its own heat more carefully. Knees draw upward, the shoulders tuck inward, under the blanket. Everyone becomes slightly smaller, slightly tighter, as if the family were not merely sleeping together, but folding itself inward against the dark. Settle, breathe, drift, wake, listen, curl closer, sleep again. That is the shape of the night. Hours pass in this way, though hours are not measured here. Only phases, the first warmth under the blankets, the first broken sleep, the deeper cold after the stones have cooled, the listening dark. The ember dark at the center of the room, the long middle of the night where thought becomes slower, and the body survives mostly by doing less. At some point, the father rises, not fully, and not with any wasted motion. He knows where everything is without light. The blanket is lifted only enough to let him out. The cold touches the place he leaves behind at once. A child half stirs, then settles again as another adult hand finds the gap and closes it. In the darkness he moves toward the hearth, where the ash still hides a little life. There is the soft sound of his crouching, then the careful stirring of coals, then breath passing over embers in measured exhalations. For a moment, nothing changes, then a dim red response, then another, then the faintest little fire sound, as if the room itself has taken a breath. He adds only a little fuel, enough to keep morning possible, no more. The fire here must be coaxed, not wasted. Too much now would leave too little later. He sits near it, only as long as he must, long enough to know the embers are alive again, long enough to warm his hands a little at their edges. Then he returns to the platform, carrying no grand rescue back with him, only continuity. And continuity is what keeps a mountain family alive. When he settles in again, the blanket shifts, opens, closes. A little cold enters, and is gradually replaced. A child sighs, a shoulder meets another shoulder, the loop begins again. Settle, breathe, drift, wake, listen, curl closer, sleep again. This is why the interruption never becomes the true story. The return does. At lower altitude, poor sleep might feel like failure. Here it feels normal. The body does not accuse itself for waking. The family does not treat shallow sleep as a problem to be solved. It is simply part of the night's structure. The room supports return. The blanket supports return. Shared warmth supports return. The low ember, the known sounds, the body's old familiarity with discomfort, all support return. So the mind rises briefly, and then sinks once more, not because the night is kind, but because it is known. Dreams deepen again toward the coldest hour. Now they are stranger, a white path that never ends, a sun in the wrong place. Ancestors walking uphill through snow without leaving tracks. A yak bell heard where there are no animals. The body is cold. The breath irregular. The room real. And yet the dream carries on with the intense symbol brightness that high places sometimes give. Then a breath catches. The dream breaks. The house returns. Wind, embers, breath, stone, blanket. The world narrows once more to what can be felt. This is the deepest part of the night. The embers are lowest. The room is coldest. The air above the blanket feels almost too sharp to belong to the same house as the pooled warmth beneath it. No one moves without reason now. The family is deep inside the business of lasting until dawn. Even thought has become quieter. There is no room left for tomorrow, only this breath, this cloth, this shoulder, this coal, this stone, this darkness, and still, somehow, rest happens. Not full rest, not luxurious rest, but enough to keep children growing. Enough to let adults rise again. Enough to carry a family through another day at the roof of the world. That is the quiet reveal hidden inside one full Sherpa night. High altitude sleep was never one sealed block. It was shallow, layered, communal, interrupted, and still restorative enough because the whole environment supported return. The room was built for it. The family was arranged for it. The body had learned it. The mountain never made it easy. But the people had made it possible. At last, the darkness begins to alter, not lighten, not yet. Only thin. The room is still black in its corners, but the black has changed character. The father senses it first, perhaps, or simply wakes, because this is the hour he always wakes. He rises again, and tends the hearth more seriously now. A little more fuel, a little more breath. The red center gathers itself, then opens. The flame begins small, then steadies. Slowly, the room regains edges. The ceiling is there again, black with soot. The storage bags are shapes again. The wall shrine takes on the faintest glow. The smoke begins climbing toward its upper layer once more. And with that first growth of fire comes the most brutal transition of all. The family must leave the blanket. The air beyond it feels impossibly cold by comparison. The warmth trap through the night vanishes almost at once when the covers are opened. It is a shock every time, even after a lifetime of mornings. The body emerges slowly, reluctantly from pooled heat into air, perhaps 30 degrees colder than the space beneath the blankets. Fingers stiffen, joints resist. The face tightens against the cold, but there is no choice. The room may still be dark. The dawn may still be incomplete. Yet the day has already begun. One by one they rise, not removing layers, but adding outer ones, not waking easily, but necessarily, outside, beyond the stone walls. Other houses are doing the same. Other fires are being coaxed back. Other children are being lifted from warmth into cold. Other yaks are shifting in their enclosures. The village is returning to itself. The pattern is larger than one family, though one family is all the room can hold. And after seeing them move through one ordinary night together, after learning the rhythm that makes impossible sleep possible, the story is ready to narrow. Because now the house is real, the night is real, and the body knows this mountain logic well enough to follow it deeper into one life. Not the famous man yet, not the summit, not the name the world remembers, but the child first. The boy who grew up inside these nights long before he stood anywhere high enough for history to notice. And after one whole family has passed through an ordinary night together, the story narrows. Not to a summit, not to fame, not to the man the world would later remember, to a child, to a boy whose earliest memories were not of achievement, but of atmosphere. Cold on the face, smoke in the rafters, butter tea in a wooden bowl, wind around stone walls, the slow pressure of shared blankets across the body. Before Tenzing became a name carried far beyond these valleys, he was simply one more Sherpa child learning what a night was. His world was made of repetition, the same room darkening early, the same hearth gathering everyone inward, the same low altar in one corner, with its butter lamp and images of protection. The same packed earth underfoot, smoothed by years of family life. The same soot on the ceiling, growing thicker season after season, until it felt less like residue than part of the house itself. The same platform against the wall where sleep would come in fragments, and still be called enough. That is how memory begins for a child, not in grand events, in constants, a particular smell, a certain kind of cold. The way the fire looked when it was low, the sound of adults speaking quietly when they thought the children were drifting, the weight of a blanket and the nearness of siblings. These are the things that write themselves deepest into the body, and they wrote themselves into his. There were many children in the family, as there often were. Some older, some younger, some strong enough already to carry more than they wished. Some still small enough to be tucked into the warmest middle of the bedding without question. A house like this was never spacious. Life moved close, learned close, suffered close, and rested close. A child did not grow up with privacy. He grew up with presence. Another elbow beside him in sleep, another breath near his cheek, another pair of hands already doing what he would one day be expected to do. His family was neither grand nor destitute. They had enough to keep going, which, in a place like this, is already a meaningful distinction. Some animals, some land, some rhythm of work that, if maintained carefully, could hold the household through another year. His father belonged to that world of patient necessity, where walls had to be checked, animals moved, stores watched, weather read. His mother belonged to it no less, though in ways history often notices less readily. Food, fuel, cloth, children, prayer, order, the work of keeping a house morally and physically intact under pressure. A boy like Tenzing did not need to be instructed in the seriousness of daily life. He breathed it. Work began early, not as punishment, as belonging. First the small tasks, carrying water in vessels that felt heavier on the return than on the walk out, gathering yak-dung where it dried, then shaping, stacking, storing it so that winter would have something to burn, watching the animals, helping to bring things in before weather turned, learning where everything lived in the room, and why. He would have learned these things the way children in difficult environments learn most things, by watching, by being drawn close to the adult world before anyone thought to call that unusual, and by making himself useful a little at a time. He learned with his hands long before he would have explained anything in words. How to hold a bowl close enough to keep its heat, how to move low in a smoke-thick room, how to make space for another body under a blanket without letting too much warmth out, how to wake in the dark without full panic when the breath felt strange, how to accept the cold at the face while protecting the chest and feet, how to rise in the morning even when the body would have preferred one more hour of gathered warmth. This was not training, it was childhood. That is what matters here. When later generations look back on his strength, they were tempted to make it dramatic, to imagine some extraordinary spirit, visible from the beginning. But endurance rarely begins that way. It begins in ordinary nights, repeated without applause. In a child learning that sleep is often shallow, that waking cold is normal, that the body can continue even when rest is imperfect. The making of such a person starts long before ambition. And poor sleep would not have seemed poor to him. It would simply have seemed like night. That is one of the gentlest truths in this part of the story. He did not lie there, comparing his world to a softer one. He did not think in terms of deprivation, because there was no second reality against which to measure it. Thin air was just air. Fragmented sleep was just sleep. Shared warmth was just family life. The body that would later astonish outsiders was being formed in a world that did not think of itself as extraordinary at all. You can imagine him there now, a child under the common blanket. The room dark except for embers, and perhaps the small, faithful lights of the altar corner. Smoke settled above, where it always settled, the ear catching the wind at the wall and no longer taking it personally. The body learning, night after night, that rest did not require perfection to matter. Only enough warmth, enough pattern, enough return. The altar would have mattered too. Not theatrically, quietly, a butter lamp, offering bowls. Images of deities and protectors, receiving the same dim attention each evening. A prayer spoken in a voice low enough not to disturb the shape of the room. To a child, such things become part of the architecture of safety, no more separate from sleep than the blankets or the stones at the feet. The sacred and the practical are not two worlds here. They are one room, and around all of this, the body was adapting without needing language for it. The lungs learning the terms of thin air, the blood learning to work harder, the chest widening with years, the mind growing used to shallow waking, to brief rises from sleep, to the strange bright dreams high places often bring. None of that would have seemed biological to him. It would have felt like ordinary being. The mountain writes its lessons into a child, long before the child knows he is being taught. That is the reveal hidden in these earliest years. The making of endurance begins long before ambition. Tenzing's extraordinary future rests on ordinary childhood nights, on soot-dark rooms, on sibling warmth, on wool kept on through sleep, on waking to breath that never quite felt complete, and then drifting down again, because drifting down again was simply what the body had learned to do. So stay with him there a little longer, the packed earth below the mats, the blackened ceiling above the embers, the family gathered in one shared line beneath heavy blankets. The butter lamp in the altar corner, the old prayer just before the room goes quiet, the child's body learning without effort and without praise how to belong to altitude. There is safety in that kind of familiarity, not comfort exactly, not softness in the modern sense, but the reassurance of sameness. The same room, the same smells, the same order of things, for a while. That is enough to let the mind rest again, after the harder loop of the night we have just crossed. But only for a while, because the house is not the only teacher waiting for him. Beyond this room, another kind of night is waiting too. A colder one in some ways, a lonelier one, a night not on the family platform, but in a porter's camp, under thin canvas, at altitudes beyond even home. And once the child is clear enough in our minds, the story can widen again toward that second apprenticeship, the one that would carry his ordinary endurance into the harsher dark of the expedition world. But the stone house is not the only place that teaches him how to sleep. As Tenzing grows older, another kind of night begins to enter his life. At home, the cold is known, the platform is known, the order of bodies beneath the blankets is known. Even discomfort belongs to a pattern the body has trusted since childhood. But beyond the village, there is another world waiting for men like him. A world of trade paths, carrying work, expedition camps, and hired labor at altitudes where even home begins to feel almost generous by comparison. The shift does not happen all at once. It begins the way many such changes begin, half out of necessity and half out of possibility. A little more work beyond the village, a little more time away from the house, a little more awareness that the mountains connect not only homes and herds and shrines, but roots, wages, strangers, and futures not yet fully imagined. Tenzing does not leave childhood behind in one dramatic act. He simply begins to move farther from its center. At first, the rhythm is seasonal. There is still home, still the stone house, still the soot-dark ceiling, the butter tea, the family platform, the old village order of sleep. But now there are stretches of time when he sleeps elsewhere, in rough shelters, in temporary stopping places, in camps that belong not to family life but to work. He learns the difference immediately. Home gathers you inward. Work exposes you. Home is shared warmth arranged with memory. Work is whatever shelter can be made before dark hardens around you. And still, the body adapts. That is the strange gift of his upbringing. What would feel unbearable to someone else often registers in him only as another variation of known discomfort. Not easy, never easy, but familiar enough not to terrify him. Then comes Darjeeling, not as an idea first, but as descent. Down from the high villages into air that thickens, into roads busier than the paths he knows, into a world where the mountains are still present, but differently arranged by human intention. Darjeeling feels crowded, damp, and full of movement. Sounds overlap. People speak languages he does not fully follow. Goods move in and out. Animals, porters, traders, foreigners. Officials, equipment, canvas, crates, boots, ropes, tins, boxes. All of it gathered into one place as though the mountain had started dreaming of empire. He sees the foreign climbers there, men from elsewhere, pale-faced, over-equipped, purposeful in ways that would seem strange if they were not also paying. They bring with them a different kind of mountain logic, one built around ascent, around plans, around camps, marked on paper before they are ever pitched on stone. To Tenzing, they are not legends, not yet. They are employers, curiosities, opportunities, and burdens all at once. They want what Sherpa bodies already know how to approach: altitude, cold, carrying, endurance. But they want it for reasons that still feel a little foreign to the valleys. So he joins the work. The loads are real. That matters first. Crates, food, fuel, rope, tents, metal things, canvas things. The weight of other people's ambition distributed across human backs. There is no poetry in the first moment of lifting such loads. Only the body making its agreement with gravity and slope. A strap across the forehead, weight settling through spine and legs, breath adjusting. Step after step after step, the same mountain day his father knew in one form, now returned in another. And when the day ends, the second kind of night begins. This is where his apprenticeship deepens, because the porter's night is not the village night. At home, the walls are stone, the platform is raised, the family is close, the room has memory, the altar sees the dark with you, the yaks breathe beyond the wall. Even poor sleep has a structure there, but in expedition life, sleep becomes thinner in every sense. The walls are canvas, if there are walls at all. The floor is ground sheet, or bare ground, or snow packed into shape. The air comes through fabric more easily than through stone. Frost forms where breath meets the tent skin. Every movement of wind is louder, closer, less filtered. And yet he sleeps there too, because he must. A tent pitched on hard ground has no real center the way a Sherpa house does. No hearth that can keep speaking through the night. No soot-black ceiling holding years of use. No household order. Only temporary arrangements. Men lie side by side because there is not enough room not to. Packs become pillows. Coats become extra bedding, blankets. If there are blankets, belong to the expedition and are rarely as warm as the woven weight of home. Sleeping bags exist, but not always enough, and not always good enough for the cold they are asked to resist. So the body invents continuity where it can, layering first, that remains the same, wool close to the skin, more wool over it. Whatever can hold a pocket of heat without making movement impossible. Boots sometimes loosened, but not far from the body. Gloves tucked inside cloth, a hat kept on, a scarf near the face. The old knowledge travels with him. Warmth is never assumed. It must be gathered, kept close, protected from waste. Then proximity. In a home, proximity is family. In a tent, it becomes fellowship of necessity. Other porters, other Sherpa men, sometimes climbers too, depending on rank, chance, and the logic of the camp. Bodies gather their warmth together because no one has invented a better answer. Elbows touch, shoulders press, breathing becomes part of the tent's shared weather. One man turns, another adjusts. Someone coughs in the thin air, someone mutters in sleep. Already the room is worse than home. But already the old communal logic is finding new shape. Carry, camp, freeze, doze, wake, work, repeat. That becomes the second loop of his life. And in some ways, these nights are harsher than the village ones, because they are lonelier even when shared. At home, poor sleep belongs inside a complete world. In camp, poor sleep belongs inside a temporary one. The mind knows the difference. A house expects your return. A tent only tolerates it for a night or two. Home closes around a family. Expedition sleep feels borrowed, provisional, exposed. There are mornings when he wakes with frost inside the tent. Not outside, where frost ought to belong, but inside, on the canvas above his face, where breath has frozen in the dark and hardened into a brittle white skin. If someone shifts too sharply, the frost falls in small cold grains onto blankets, hats, cheeks. The tent has kept out some wind, some snow, perhaps enough to make survival possible, but not enough to create anything like comfort. The body knows the bargain immediately. There are camps above the altitude of home. That matters too. At home, the air is already thin enough to disturb sleep. But the body has been raised inside that disturbance. Higher up, even his adaptation must work harder. The lungs do what they can. The chest keeps lifting. The blood keeps trying to pull enough from air that gives too little. Periodic breathing becomes sharper there, more intrusive. Sleep narrows into lighter intervals. Headaches become part of the bedding. Thirst does not disappear even in cold. The body is tired enough to sleep and too deprived to sleep well at the same time. He lies there in the dark and drifts, then rises again, not fully awake, only pulled upward by the old familiar incompleteness. A breath not deep enough, a pause too long, the sudden need for several fuller inhalations before the body trusts the night again. Around him, other men do the same. A tent at high altitude has its own breathing rhythm, uneven, collective, uneasy. One porter inhales sharply, another snores for a moment, then stops. Someone turns and the canvas crackles with frost. Then quiet, then the wind, then the breathing begins its strange work again. Carry camp, freeze, doze, wake, work, repeat. This is how endurance is written more deeply into him. Not by heroic speeches, not by a single grand climb, by repetition, by the body learning that inadequate rest need not prevent movement the next day, by discovering again and again that one can rise from a poor night and still shoulder a load, still climb, still return, still eat, still lie down again in the same cold knowledge and survive another cycle. There are mornings when even boots have become hostile, leather stiffened by cold laces, difficult under numb fingers. The simple work of dressing becomes its own small climb. A man does not leap into the day at such altitudes. He assembles himself into it. Sock, boot, strap, coat, glove, hat, pause, breath, another strap, another pause, then outside into air that feels sharpened beyond reason. And yet, in a strange way, that too becomes familiar. What the climbers experience as exceptional misery, Tenzing experiences as another demanding morning. He does not enjoy it, he is not immune to it, but he recognizes it, that recognition is a form of wealth no expedition can issue, and no foreign training can imitate. Home gave him that, childhood gave him that, the family platform gave him that, years of waking into cold and thin air before dawn gave him that. He begins to notice the difference between his own nights and those of the foreigners. They struggle not only with the altitude itself, but with the shock of it. They are surprised by their own breathing, distressed by their own sleep, offended almost by the body's refusal to behave normally under such conditions. Tenzing has no such argument with his body. Its distress is old news. Its strange compromises do not insult him. Poor sleep is not a crisis. It is part of the agreement that difference matters more than strength alone. It is part of what makes him useful, not because he sleeps well, but because he knows how to function without sleeping well. That is a subtler and more historically honest truth. He is not some mythic mountain creature, immune to cold or deprivation. He is a man whose whole early life prepared him to continue through fragmented rest, thin air, low warmth, and the absence of ideal conditions. Later, people may call that extraordinary. In the years when it is being formed, it simply feels like continuity. Between expeditions, he comes home, and home sleep changes too, though gently. The stone house now feels heavier, deeper, more enclosed after nights under canvas. The family platform seems more generous, even when it is cold. The soot-dark ceiling, the altar corner, the thick stone, the known sequence of prayer, tea, blanket, breath. Everything the body once took for granted now reveals itself as abundance of a local kind. Not easy abundance, but continuity, protection, recognition, Home becomes not only his origin, but his standard of comparison. Yet he no longer belongs wholly to one world. That is part of the second night too, when he sleeps at home. Some part of him now remembers tents, camps, higher ridges, foreign voices, loads waiting for morning. And when he sleeps in camp, some part of him remembers the house, the platform, the old family arrangement of warmth, the sound of home breathing in the dark. His night split between these two worlds, and he belongs entirely to neither one for long. This soft tension enters the sleep itself. Home dreams in camp. Camp fatigue at home, carrying one world inside the other. There are nights when the dream and the body almost become the same thing. He dreams of climbing, and wakes to a slope still ahead. He dreams of warmth, and wakes with frost near his mouth. He dreams of the village and wakes to canvas moving in wind. Or else he lies in the family house and dreams not of childhood, but of roots, loads, snowfields, and morning orders from men who speak in clipped foreign rhythms. Sleep is still fragmented, but now the fragments hold two landscapes. And this is how the second apprenticeship works, not by replacing the first one, but by extending it. The stone house taught him how to survive a cold, interrupted night inside a system of family warmth. The expedition tent teaches him how to survive a colder, thinner, lonelier version of the same truth. Both worlds are training him, though no one would use that word. Both are making possible the man history will later notice. But the making itself remains quiet, repetitive, almost humble. Carry camp, freeze, doze, wake, work, repeat. That rhythm becomes as formative as any lesson spoken aloud. It shapes the muscles, certainly the lungs, the chest, the calloused patience of the body, but it also shapes expectation. He stops needing perfect rest in order to trust the next day. He stops expecting comfort before effort. He learns, more deeply than before, that one can keep going even while tired, even while headachy, even while under-rested, even while breathing through a night that never fully gives itself to sleep. This is the quiet reveal hidden in the second night of his life. What made Tenzing exceptional later was not heroic willpower. It was thousands of cold, fragmented nights that trained him to function without ideal rest. Night after night at home, night after night in camp, stone, then canvas family warmth, then porter closeness, known cold, then harsher cold, always the same old mountain law. Do what you can with what the night allows, then rise anyway. So stay with him a little longer between those two worlds. The village room breathing behind stone, the canvas wall trembling in wind, the frost inside the tent, the family blanket at home, the shared sleep of porters, the boots that must be thawed, the breath that never fully deepens, the body that keeps learning. He is not yet a legend here, not yet even a story told outward. He is only a young man becoming useful to the mountain in a new way, carrying his childhood sleep into harsher places and discovering that it still holds. And before the path ahead becomes too practical, too much about work and camps and the plain mechanics of endurance, the story must turn again toward the mountain mind itself, toward the older things that still live around sleep here. Prayer before dark, the strange brightness of dreams at altitude, the sense that the night is never only physical, and the thin porous boundary between the breathing body and the unseen world. And before the path ahead becomes too practical, too much about work and camps and the plain mechanics of endurance, the story turns again toward the mountain mind. Because in Sherpa life, night is never only darkness. It is not merely the absence of all daylight, nor only the cold stretch between one labor and the next. Night is a threshold, a thinner place, a time when the body grows vulnerable in its sleep, when the fire lowers, when the room softens into shadow, and when the world beyond the visible edge of things seems to press a little nearer than it does by day. The mountains, so immense and indifferent in sunlight, do not disappear after dark. They become less seen and more felt, and that changes the meaning of rest. Before sleep, the house is gently prepared for more than cold. The prayer has already been spoken, but its quiet remains in the room. The butter lamp still burns near the altar, its flame small and patient, too modest to brighten the house, and yet more than strong enough to keep darkness from becoming total. That little light matters in ways no stranger could fully understand. It is warmth, yes, but not mainly warmth, it is orientation. It is protection. It is a sign that the room remains watched, held, connected to presences kinder and older than the night outside. Around the sleeping platform, there may be small objects that do not look important until you learn how to see them. A strip of blessed cloth, a carved stone, a token placed near the head of the bed, a prayer tucked into a beam or hanging beside the altar. None of these things would stop the wind. None would warm a child's feet, yet all belong to the same system as the blankets and the walls and the heated stones. In a house like this, physical safety and spiritual safety do not live in separate rooms. They lie down together. The family knows that sleep changes a person. The body remains present, but consciousness loosens. The eyes close. The breath enters its stranger rhythms. The mind moves away from the room and toward the less certain places where dreams begin. That loosening can feel beautiful. It can also feel exposed. Up here, where sleep is already fragile from cold and altitude, the night has a different texture. A human being can wake half suddenly, heart working a little harder, lungs asking for more air, unsure for a second whether the thing they felt was only a dream or something that stood just outside it. That is why the protective layer matters, a whispered mantra, a prayer before the embers are banked, a gesture made almost automatically near the altar. The body may not fully understand how much it trusts these things, but trust settles into ritual the way soot settles into beams. After enough years, it becomes part of the house itself. And then sleep begins, not as pure unconsciousness, but as passage. At altitude, dreams often arrive with unusual brightness. The body is still cold, the breath is still uneven, but the dream world does not come dimly. It comes sharpened, colors seem cleaner, stranger, movement feels more symbolic. A path in snow appears and means more than a path. A yak is not only a yak. A bird crossing a ridge is not merely a bird. The source text leans into this strongly. High-altitude sleep was often understood not just as physically difficult, but as unusually vivid in dream, full of images that carried emotional and spiritual weight. A child might dream of climbing, not the grand climbing of later legend, only the endless upward movement that belongs to mountain life. Steps that continue beyond where waking paths would stop. Snow to the chest and yet the body somehow warm within it. Ancestors farther ahead on the slope, not frightening, not entirely human either. Only familiar, in the old deep way of dream recognition. The child wakes and says little, or says enough for an elder to nod and tell him to speak the dream again, more slowly. A mother might dream of an animal standing still in moonless light. A snow leopard watching without attack, a raven calling from a place too high for ravens. A yak moving through the room as though the walls no longer mattered. These are not always interpreted as messages in the simple sense. Not every dream is prophecy, but neither is it dismissed as nonsense. The dream belongs to the person and to the house, and sometimes to the wider fabric of meanings the community already knows how to hold. The dead may come too, not in horror, not in the loud theatrical way stories elsewhere sometimes summon them. More often they come quietly, as if crossing only a short distance. A grandmother sitting near the hearth, where no living person now sits. A father walking uphill under bright snowlight, turning only once before continuing on. A lost child, or a lost sibling, appearing near the edge of the dream with the same face they held in life, and yet altered by the strange calm that dreams give the dead. In such a culture, these visits are not treated lightly, nor are they treated as absurd. The dead remain part of the house by memory already. Sleep merely gives them a softer doorway, and there are the dreams that seem less like memory than like warning. A dream of suffocating, a dream of being unable to move, a dream in which the body keeps trying to climb but cannot fill its lungs. Here, the distinction between spiritual meaning and bodily signal becomes beautifully blurred. A dream like that may be read as both. The mountain mind does not insist on choosing one explanation and discarding the other. A person may wake, drink tea, offer a prayer, and also take more care with breathing, with altitude, with the body's strange distress. Emotional truth and practical truth are allowed to coexist. That may be one of the most graceful things in this whole world. The night does not demand hard categories. Was it a spirit or a dream? A warning from the body, or a message from something beyond it? An ancestor, or only memory shaped by thin air? The question matters less than the response. The response is what keeps a person within the circle of meaning. A prayer spoken, a dream shared, a small offering made, a warning heeded, the house remains intact, not because everything is explained, but because not everything needs to be. So the butter lamp continues to burn. Its flame trembles. Its gold light touches the nearest bowls, the edge of a blanket, the face of a child already deep in first sleep. The shadows it makes are slow and soft. In such light, a carved figure on the altar can seem almost alive. A fold of cloth may resemble a crouched animal. The beam above the platform may hold forms the waking eye would ignore by day. But night does not ignore them. Night receives them differently. The room becomes more permeable after dark, not in its walls, but in its meanings. Even the mountain beyond the house feels closer to spirit at night. By day, it is stone, snow, slope, weather. By night, it is also presence. Vast unseen, listening perhaps, or at least not fully indifferent in the way daylight sometimes suggests. The great silence outside the village is never empty silence. It is inhabited silence that understanding shapes the way people lie down. It makes humility sensible. It makes small prayers feel less like superstition and more like good manners toward the dark. And because dreams are taken seriously, they become part of the shared life of the village. Morning may bring the retelling of what was seen in sleep. A grandmother listens, a monk or elder interprets, a mother decides whether a child should stay close that day. A father remembers a dream before setting out on a path made dangerous by weather. Not every dream changes action, most do not, but all are granted room to exist. A person is not expected to wake, shake off the night completely, and pretend the mind did not travel anywhere meaningful. The dream belongs to the same world as the day, only deeper and less lit. There are also the stranger experiences at the edge of waking. Not full dreams, not full sight, a figure near the doorway that disappears when the eyes open wider. A sound heard in the room that may be wind, or may not. The certainty that someone was standing beside the platform when no one is there. Modern language might call these half-sleep perceptions, altitude distortions, the mind surfacing too quickly from fragmented rest. But in the house, no one needs that language in order to live with the experience. They know only that night sometimes thins the boundary between what is sensed and what is seen, between what is real in one way and real in another. And because the culture already has a place for such moments, fear is lessened. That may be the true gift of the spiritual frame, not proof, not certainty, but containment. A child who wakes from a vivid dream is not told that nothing happened. He is told that night is deep, that dreams carry things, that prayers are good, that morning will come. A woman who senses a presence in the dark is not cast into panic by needing to decide whether she is mistaken. She can simply acknowledge the feeling, touch the prayer cloth, listen to the butter lamp, and let the night pass through her without breaking her. That is why sleep here is not just biological recovery. It is passage, it is protection, it is meaning. A body lies down because it must recover from labor. Yes, but it also lies down inside a network of symbols, prayers, remembered presences, and dream possibilities that make the night larger than physiology alone. Cold and altitude make sleep fragile. Ritual and meaning help make that fragility bearable. So stay in that room a little longer, the butter lamp near the altar, the whispered mantra before the embers are left to their lowest glow, the child drifting into a dream of snow and bright animal eyes, the old dead not entirely gone from the edges of family memory, the house itself, both shelter and threshold, the night outside immense and dark, and the night inside close and layered with protection. Let it remain unresolved in the best way. The mountain mind does not need every dream reduced. It does not need every strange waking explained away. It needs only enough trust to sleep again, enough ritual to soften fear, enough meaning to let the body lie down under the blanket and pass once more into that porous place between breath and vision. And once we have drifted through that layer of sleep, once the house has become not only a shelter, but a spiritual chamber, the story can move further still, away from the living room of one night and into the quieter traces left behind by many nights. Old platforms, hearthstones, abandoned shelters, half-buried walls, the archaeological whisper of sleeping places that no longer hold bodies, but still seem to hold a little memory of warmth. And once the house has become not only a shelter, but a spiritual chamber, the story can move further still, away from the living room of one night, away from the breathing family beneath one shared blanket, out toward places where no one is sleeping now, and yet the shape of sleep remains. Imagine a high valley after many winters have passed. The house is no longer a house in the full human sense. The roof has gone or sunk, the doorway stands lower than it once did. One wall has given itself back to the slope, another leans under the old pressure of weather. Snow gathers where a family once kept bowls, wind moves through a room that used to be careful with its warmth. The mountain is always patient in reclaiming what people briefly borrow from it, and still, even after abandonment, some places continue to hold the feeling of habitation. The threshold is still there, the stones of the wall are still there, the outline of the hearth remains at the center, and if you stand quietly enough inside such a ruin, you can almost feel what the room once asked of the night. Archaeology in a place like this does not arrive as complete knowledge. It arrives in fragments, a raised strip of stone where a sleeping platform must once have stood. Layers of soot blackening the upper stones more heavily than the lower ones. Ash pressed deep into the old hearth, holding the memory of countless small fires. A corner of the room more protected than the rest, where blankets or mats may once have been stacked. A threshold, worn slightly smoother than the surrounding stone by generations of entering and leaving before dawn. None of it speaks loudly. That is why it belongs so well to this hour. The old mountain world has left traces, not explanations. It does not tell us everything. It only suggests, here people slept, here they laid their heads, here the fire burned low through winter nights. Here someone rose in darkness and nudged life back into embers. Here children were warmed in the middle while adults held the colder edge. Here prayer settled into smoke. Here the body learned once again that rest could happen even in hardship, if the room had been arranged with enough care. The raised platforms matter first. Again and again, in old high-altitude dwellings, the sleeping place is lifted above the floor. Never extravagantly, only enough to matter. Stone supports, wooden planks, now long vanished, mats perhaps once laid over them, then blankets, then bodies. A few inches of height between sleeper and ground can mean more than comfort. It can mean survival. The old builders understood that cold gathers low and holds there with particular persistence. To rise even slightly above that layer is to step into a different agreement with the room. That is the first whisper the ruins give back. Sleep was never casual here. It was engineered, though not in the modern sense of diagrams and measured systems. It was refined by repetition, 100 winters, 1,000 nights, one family learning what helped, another improving it, another passing the arrangement down until the architecture of rest became part of the architecture of the house itself. The walls tell a similar story. They are thicker than an outsider might expect, and not only because stone is what the mountain offers. Thick walls slow the wind. They keep the inner air from changing too quickly. They collect warmth from the fire and release it back only slowly. In some ruins, the inner surfaces still show the darkened sheen left by long exposure to smoke, and that too is part of the old intelligence. Soot was not planned like plaster, and yet over time it became a kind of accidental insulation, sealing hairline cracks, softening drafts, thickening the house's defense against the cold. The original source material is especially strong on this idea, that what looks like residue to us was in practice part of the room's survival system. The hearth remains the clearest center, even after collapse. Even after abandonment, the hearth usually survives better in memory than any other part of the room. Ash layers remain, stones cracked by heat remain, Sometimes traces in the ash still carry hints of what was burned there. Yak-dung, bits of scrub, perhaps a little juniper when juniper could be spared. Each layer of fuel is also a layer of night. Each layer means a family once sat here, ate here, prayed here, lay down here, woke here. The old ash is not only evidence of fire, it is evidence of continuity, and continuity is the true luxury in such places. A single fire means very little. A hearth tended for years means a world. In some old houses, the room itself suggests a dual logic of life and sleep. One side for work, one side for storage, one side held quieter, slightly more protected, better arranged for rest. This is never the rigid separation of later architecture, where sleeping belongs behind a different door in a different chamber. Mountain rest rarely had that luxury, but even within one room, the old households made distinctions. They carved out, through habit and placement, a more protected zone where the night could gather more gently. Then, there are the seasonal shelters. These are even quieter in the record, because they were always lighter, more temporary, less defended against time. Herding camps higher up, short-term shelters along routes, small enclosures of stone, meant to take the edge off the wind rather than create a true home. In such places, almost nothing of the sleeping world remains. Perhaps only a ring of stone where a wall once stood, a blackening on a rock from some old fire, a platform improvised from flatter slabs. These places are harder to read, and because they are harder to read, they stir the imagination more deeply. How many nights were spent there? How many brief, uneasy sleeps between one pasture and the next? One journey and the next, one weather shift and the next? People must have lain close in such places too, wrapped in whatever they had, listening to animals nearby, accepting sleep not as safety, but as a temporary surrender made under harsher terms than home allowed. These are the nights archaeology rarely preserves in detail, and yet they may have taught some of the hardest lessons of all. There are abandoned thresholds that still feel ceremonial. A certain placement of stone, a little offering left in a crevice, a fragment of cloth that weather should have claimed sooner, but somehow did not. In some old sites, there are signs that departure itself once required ritual. A last little act at the hearth, a small token left where a family no longer intended to sleep. A gesture of thanks perhaps, or apology, or continuity offered to the house before leaving it to the mountain. This too belongs to the architecture of rest. A place that held human vulnerability through many nights was not simply walked away from without acknowledgement. That matters. A sleeping place is never only functional. A place where a body closes its eyes night after night becomes charged with something more than use. It gathers worry, dream, illness, recovery, prayer, the sound of children breathing, the grief of nights when someone did not wake, the relief of mornings when everyone did. Even if a later generation no longer knows the names of the people who once slept there, the stones have held their pattern. The room remembers in shape what it cannot remember in language. And that is where archaeology becomes atmosphere rather than proof. We do not need every answer. We do not need every blanket preserved, every wooden support intact, every offering legible. It is enough to sense that ancient people in these valleys did not merely endure cold with brute will. They refined their nights, they modified walls, lifted platforms, managed smoke, banked hearths, positioned sleeping spaces, developed arrangements that passed warmth from stone to mat, to blanket, to body with as much care as later ages would pass heat through pipes and stoves and sealed rooms. The old mountain world developed a subtle architecture of rest. That is the real reveal here, not rest in comfort, rest in intelligence. A pattern so evolved through necessity that much of it later vanished when other forms of comfort arrived, and when the finer grain of embodied knowledge no longer had to be carried in the same way. New materials came, new technologies came, better stoves, better walls, commercial blankets, imported goods, and gradually some of the smaller arts disappeared. Not because they were foolish, but because they were no longer needed with the same urgency. Yet the stones keep some memory of them, a half-buried platform under drifted earth, an old ash bed deeper than it first appears, a soot-darkened overhang, a wall thicker near the sleeping side, a threshold that seems too small until you remember that every inch of opening costs heat. The ruin does not speak in explanation. It speaks in fittingness, in the sense that each feature belongs exactly to the night that required it. Even the emptier places carry that feeling. A shelter now open to sky where the roof is gone, a collapsed wall exposing the old inner dark, a prayer cloth fragment lifted once by wind, then dropped back into a corner. A stone that may have been part of a hearth, or part of an altar, or both. At this distance, some functions blur. That is not a failure of history. It is part of the truth. Human life, in hard places, rarely kept its categories clean. Practical and sacred, warmth and meaning, fire and prayer, bed and family and survival, all of it pressed close together under the same roof. So walk softly through these half-lost rooms. Do not ask them for more certainty than they can give. Let them offer only what they still hold, a hush, a shape, a few preserved answers to the old question of how people slept where sleep should have been difficult. Let the raised stone edge suggest a bed. Let the soot suggest winters too many to count. Let the ash suggest one fire after another, and one family after another, each believing that tonight, if the room held, they could wake again. There is something almost tender in that. Not because the old houses were kind, they were not. They were often smoky, cold, cramped, and built under pressure. But because within those limits, people made choices. Subtle choices, persistent choices. They made a place for the body to lie down. They made a way for the fire to remain possible until dawn. They made a little shelter, not only from the weather, but from the chaos of having no pattern at all. And perhaps that is why the ruins feel quieter than empty. They are not merely abandoned, they are completed in another way. The families are gone, the voices are gone, the blankets, mats, and bodies are gone, but the old intention remains. The stones still hold the memory of being arranged around rest. The earth still remembers the pressure of repeated nights. The threshold still implies a return, even if no one now returns. So stay with that hush, a little longer, the half-seen platform. The old ash under newer dust, the wall blackened by smoke, no living hand now makes. The little object at the edge of a ruined shrine, the sense that warmth once lived here, and that the stones, in their patient mountain way, have not entirely forgotten it. And from there, from these vanished rooms and lost refinements, another quieter question begins to rise. Because even in the same valley, under the same thin air, with the same wind on the walls, and the same old knowledge passing through generations, not everyone slept with the same amount of warmth. Not every house held the night equally. Not every family lay down under the same thickness of blanket, the same security of wall, the same margin against the cold. And that final difference, soft but real, begins to matter now. And that final difference, soft but real, begins to matter now. If the mountain made life hard for everyone, did everyone still experience night equally? Not equally, no way. The same thin air moved through every valley, the same winter cold gathered outside every wall. The same darkness fell quickly over roofstone, prayer flag, yak enclosure, and frozen path. But once that cold reached the houses, it did not always meet the same answer. Some rooms held it back a little better, some families possessed thicker blankets, steadier stores, warmer walls, or a larger circle of people to absorb the night together. The mountain was impartial, warmth was not. At the more protected end of village life stood the monasteries. Not luxurious places, never that, but steadier ones. Their walls were often thicker, their rooms better maintained, their stores more collective, their routines more regular. A monastery held many lives under one discipline, and that discipline itself became a form of warmth. Fires were watched, food was distributed with consistency. Bodies gathered in prayer halls before dispersing to sleep, carrying some of that accumulated heat with them. Even a simple monastic cell could feel less exposed than a poorer family's house, because the whole structure behind it was stronger, more collectively supported, and more likely to endure a harsh season without falling into neglect. Then there were the trading families. They too lived under the same sky, breathed the same thin air, and woke to the same frost-edged mornings. But trade could add a little margin to mountain life. Better wool, more blankets, more reliable food, a somewhat larger room. a little more fuel set aside against the deepest cold. Perhaps a house with more than one sleeping area, or at least a better protected section where the night could be managed more gently. Not comfort in the lowland sense, only a softer version of hardship, and at this altitude, even that was significant. A wealthier family might not sleep warmly by our standards, but they might sleep warmer than their neighbors. That difference matters. A thicker blanket does not erase the altitude. A larger room does not make the lungs forget their work. More food does not make periodic breathing disappear. Yet a body that goes to bed less hungry will make more heat. A family that can burn a little more fuel into the evening will lie down in a better room. A child wrapped in denser wool will wake less often from the cold at the skin. Sometimes history changes not through dramatic abundance, but through very small buffers against the night. There were also families who moved between worlds, caravan people, expedition organizers, men who worked with foreign climbers and brought back not ease, exactly, but variation. A canvas sheet that might reinforce a wall, a different blanket, an imported vessel that held heat differently, a sleeping bag perhaps, or pieces of expedition equipment adapted into village life. These did not replace the old mountain logic, they joined it. Traditional stone, traditional fire, traditional family sleeping, but now touched here and there by outside tools that slightly altered what the night could feel like. Below these, more buffered lives, were the poorer households. Not abandoned households, not lives outside the circle of community. Sherpa society did not leave its vulnerable entirely alone. But still, some nights were harder than others, and some homes had fewer defenses to offer. Thinner blankets, smaller stores, less fuel, more urgent rationing, a wall that needed repair and had not yet received it. An old person without enough younger strength nearby. A widow, a family whose animals were too few, a room where the fire must be banked earlier. The tea stretched thinner, the bodies gathered closer because there was no other way to hold the cold back. In such places, the night could feel more immediate. The mountain entered sooner, the edges of the room bit deeper, the difference between enough and not enough narrowed dangerously. And yet even here, it is important to keep the tone truthful. This is not a story of great palaces and total deprivation. The gradient of warmth in Sherpa society was real, but it existed inside a universally difficult world. The warmest sleepers in the village were still sleeping cold, by almost any modern measure. The wealthiest trader still woke in thin air, the monastery still knew smoke, frost, and interrupted breathing. The better room was still a mountain room, the better blanket was still defending a body against Himalayan night, not wrapping it in ease. That is what makes the contrast so quietly haunting. The cold touched everyone, but not with the same closeness. One child lay beneath two good blankets, another beneath one worn one. One household had enough fuel to keep the embers more alive toward dawn. Another had to save every last scrap and let the room harden sooner. One monastery wall held the wind better. One poorer house let it whisper more sharply through its seams. The difference is subtle to us. To them, it would have been the difference between a bearable night and a more punishing one. And still the same mountain, darkness lay over all of it. The same stars over monastery roof and poor house roof alike. The same wind around the walls, the same thin air moving into every chest. This is why the question matters without needing to become sharp. Not because we must turn the night into accusation, but because it reveals something quietly true about all human societies. Even where hardship is widely shared, warmth still gathers unevenly. Some lives have more buffers, more food, more fabric, more walls, more communal protection, more margin against error. Others sleep closer to exposure. That is the reveal hidden inside the social world of Sherpa night. The cold touched everyone, but the warmest sleep usually belonged to those with more buffers. More walls, more food, more communal support, more chances to recover from a bad night before the next one came. The mountain remained severe for all, but some families met that severity with thicker layers between body and dark. So let that difference be seen softly. A monastery hall in dim butter lamp light, a trader's heavier blanket laid over sleeping children. A porter's mixed household, using both old and new ways to hold warm. A poorer room with less to burn and fewer layers to share. All of them beneath the same high black sky, all of them listening to the same wind in different degrees of shelter. And once the comparison has been seen, let it loosen again before it hardens, because the deepest truth of these nights is not argument. It is adaptation, the small human ability to build just enough pattern, just enough warmth, just enough meaning inside difficulty that sleep, however fragile, can still return. If their nights were colder, thinner, and harsher than ours, why does their rest still feel more coherent? Perhaps because the whole shape of their world prepared them for it. Darkness stayed dark, no bright hour extended itself long past the body's willingness to remain awake. Day used the muscles honestly, water had to be carried, fuel had to be gathered, animals had to be watched. The body did not come to night full of unfinished stimulation. It came tired in ways the blanket could understand. The room itself was built around return, fire at the center, sleeping platform at the edge, prayers before dark, family nearness under one covering, acceptance that waking in the night did not mean failure, only another breath before sleep resumed. Their rest was not comfortable, but it was coherent. That may be the real secret. The world around sleep was structured to support return. If the breath broke, the body knew what to do. If the cold rose, the blanket and the nearby body and the remembered arrangement offered an answer. If a dream unsettled the mind, there was ritual to hold it. If the night felt spiritually thin, there was prayer. If the fire dropped too low, someone rose and coaxed it back. Nothing was easy, yet everything belonged to one system. Our world often gives us more comfort and less coherence. We sleep in softer beds, under warmer roofs, with more oxygen, more food, more fabric, more controlled temperature. And still the mind resists rest. Light stays too long, thought continues when it should dim. The body lies down, but the day does not always release it. We have more comfort perhaps, and less pattern, more ease, and less permission to let the night simply be night. So return once more to the Sherpa room. The embers are low. The butter lamp is still breathing near the altar. The layered wool has settled over the sleeping family. Beyond the wall, the yak gives one slow exhale into the dark. The mountain remains outside, vast and cold and indifferent. But the house has done what it can. The room is held. The family has arranged itself inside warmth as carefully as people can. The night is not conquered. It is only being lived through, and somehow that is enough. Let your own breathing follow that room now, slower, lower. Less effort than theirs. Let the shoulders loosen. Let the jaw soften. Let the limbs grow heavier where they already rest. You do not need to make the mountain your own in order to receive its lesson. It is enough to feel, for a moment, what those nights were made of. Darkness that stayed dark, work that tired the body honestly, ritual that softened fear, shared rest, repeated sounds, and the quiet acceptance that interrupted sleep was still sleep if the body knew how to return. That return is what matters, not perfection, not endless unbroken unconsciousness, only the gentle ability to drift, rise, listen, and drift again. And perhaps that is why their nights stay with us, not because they were romantic, not because we should envy them, but because within such difficulty they built a world in which rest, however fragile, still made sense. So let the story settle there. The house still stands, the embers still breathe faintly. Butter lamp keeps its small faithful light. The family sleeps in one gathered shape. The mountain remains outside, where it has always been. And sleep, needing no final explanation, continues.